Hello, and welcome to Trestlebridge Capital's Network Spotlight. Before we begin, here's a quick note from our legal team. Hosting today's discussion is Eric Jefferson, Managing Partner of Trestlebridge Capital, and joining us as our featured guest is Gregg Cohen, President of Campus Bound. This is one you won't want to miss. Let's dive in.
Well, hello and welcome to the Trestlebridge Capital Network Spotlight Series. This is one of our initiatives where we interview members with our professional network that specialize in some of the more nuanced aspects of wealth management. My name is Eric Jefferson, Managing Partner with Trestlebridge, and very excited for our conversation today. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Gregg Cohen, going through some of the nuance of not only college admissions process, as well navigating the financial aid. Gregg, very excited to have you with us here today and appreciate you making some time to join
Thanks
us.
for having me. This is great.
Now, before we dive in, just to give our listeners some context, you and I were connected only fairly recently. There was an individual we had worked with for years that we would bring in as a specialist, helping families going through this process, navigate some of the nuance. That individual had stepped back. They were kind enough to make an introduction to their mentor, yourself. And I know, fast forward to today, probably now worked on just a handful of some joint cases, had some phenomenal feedback. Truly is a great service that you guys offer, one that we obviously wanted to take an opportunity and highlight in our format today. So first and foremost, let me say thank you for everything that you're doing. And as we sort of jump in here, want to pick your brain, getting some context, maybe going back to the beginning, if you will. You founded and operate multiple businesses,
Campus Bound.
helps families with the college admissions, as well navigating the financial aid process. You also operate College Affordable. That's a nonprofit that's dedicated to making college more affordable and accessible for all families. Clearly, just looking at your resume, this is a passion for you. I'd be curious what inspired you to get into this line of work.
Well, I've got to credit my mother. Actually, so in about 2000, 2001, I was finishing up my my MBA over at Babson, and my mother was doing side of her house, college consulting, working with students through this process. And I saw the opportunity. I saw that there's a growing need to make a difference for students that were going through this really difficult process. And I had knowledge and background in financial matters. So I got up to speed on the financial aid part of it and, instantly could see the difference that you could make in terms of the investments and the opportunities that students could be able to have access to, and how it all fit together with the college search and application process. And I also saw that there was a lot of need and a lot of complexity to this for the students that were going to college. And so we decided to grow the business and really start a really established business, not just a small mom and pop kind of an operation. And so we hired somebody who was a director of guidance at a local high school, opened up an office in Quincy, Mass. And since then, we've grown to now a team of 40 counselors. For a while, we had multiple offices in the greater Boston area, but then we now are remote because of COVID. Realized it makes it easier for the students and our team to be able to do it. So we work with the students individually with the college search and application process to really help them to find schools that are great fits, help them put their best foot forward with the applications and the essays, and helping them to walk through this process, which has become very convoluted and challenging for students. So we become their guide, their partner. And then the financial part is to really help people to reduce the cost of college, and tap into all those opportunities that might make it less expensive.
That's great and amazing work that you do. Again, through the experiences, had the opportunity to partner with. And when we think about the admissions process, I know you mentioned that's one that's continually evolving. Be curious if you could touch on what are some of those more recent developments, and more importantly, for families that are going through it, if you could think about what colleges are really looking at today when they're determining who gets admitted to those institutions. What are those things you think families should really be focused on?
So the college process has really, and the requirements of the college process has really ballooned over the last few years. And the recent developments are, first of all, the start of COVID, the test optional movement really took hold, where it used to be a small, a few hundred colleges, not that many competitive colleges were test optional. Now there are 1,500 of the test optional. Because at the beginning, COVID said people couldn't get into the test. And then the college would say, we'll give this for 3 or 5 years. Now we're seeing testing coming back. Some of the highly selected schools in the country are saying, we want to see those scores. So MIT and Georgetown, and there were certain schools in the South that never got rid of the requirement. So testing and the role of testing has become back into vogue, not completely compared to where it was. And so how students think about testing is really plan, and if they're going to submit their scores or not, if the scores are optional. So there's a lot more strategy when it comes to the testing. The other thing that's been really a big change is that schools are asking a lot of extra questions. They really want to get to the heart of the matter if the student's really interested in their school, and if they're really a good fit for the school. So they have what they call supplemental questions. And just 2 years ago, our average student had 9 extra essays to write of different lengths for their application. Even though there's the common application and there's one main essay, they have extra questions. And if you're applying to several schools and they all have an extra 1 or 2, next thing you know, you have 9 or 10. Well, a year ago, schools added more. And now, in just a matter of a year or two, our average was 14. So the average student, and the ones that have the more selective schools, they're doing 20, 25 different essays. So the amount of weight that puts on a student going through this process has really exploded. But those extra essays are really important because it's going to show the school that you're really interested in them and that you know them. And so they become a vital part of it. The other thing that's gone on is a lot of schools, especially the selective ones, have gotten early decision heavy, which means they're accepting a greater part of the population through this early decision process, which is basically you're telling the school, you're my first choice. And because of that, we're going to give you a competitive advantage of getting in. So there's a big draw for a student to need to do that or want to do that. The flip side is you've got to be prepared from a financial standpoint because you're going down that path with that one college. So you need to know that you can afford it. So for families, particularly those ones that want to compare prices, there's a double-edged sword to this that they're really wrestling with. So some of these enrollment management strategies these colleges have and some of the steps that are required have really become more complicated for the students and keeping it all organized. So, my advice for those students is you got to get started early. This process, it used to be 20 years ago when I started, we'd say really start, spring term of the junior year. And because of the requirements, because of the complexity of the search and finding those schools and certainly the budgeting part, you really have to start earlier, like spring of their sophomore year or fall of your junior year. So you have the time to do it, a well thought out process with all of it.
Yeah, that's great. And going back, you talk about now 14 essays, but that's presumably per school. So if you're not going the early decision route, there's that many more, and that much more work that obviously falls on kids that are still in school full time. Never mind playing sports and any other extracurriculars that obviously these colleges are certainly looking for as well.
Yeah. There's certain parts you can do early, and then there's certain parts you can't do until the fall of your senior year. So how you plan this is so vital.
And drilling into the timing piece again, I'm sure it varies student by student, but on average, what does that typical start to finish look like? And within that process, any key dates that parents need to be acutely aware of?
So, really starting to think about this fall of junior year, but the first key date is the PSAT or practice SAT that's offered. Some schools offer a practice ACT, which is just a competitive test. But, we see that the fall of the junior year is a great time to take the practice test. Start to think about your testing plan because in the spring, you're usually going to take 1 or 2 tests. It's also when you're going to want to start your search. So you can spread it out, especially if your students thinking about schools outside of your geographical area and you need to take flights and take days off from work. You want to be able to see these schools while the students are in session. So the longer time that you have to do the visits to school, the better you're going to do your homework, show their interest in the school, but it's not all jammed into a certain time frame. We like to tell students, by the time you get to the end of your junior year, you want your college list pretty much settled on schools that you could see yourself at so that you can afford most of your summer in the fall of the senior year into the applications because the early deadlines, which mean early action or early decision, are like November 1st, October 15th even. So you don't have a lot of time once you get back to school with sports and with activities and with jobs and everything else that goes on in life to get it all done. So we really strongly encourage people to get a head start on it. And that's just from the admissions part.
So fast forward, they figure out the school, they go through the application, they receive the good news in the mail. Now comes the challenging part of figuring out how they pay for it. Now, I know in our conversations you mentioned the financial aid process is significantly evolved over the years as well. For parents that haven't gone through this, walk us through, if you would, what does that process look like today? And again, what are some of those things every parent should have on their radar as they're going through it?
The financial aid application process doesn't happen until the senior year, but you need to be thinking about this well before that. And what my recommendation is always is as the search is getting going, sophomore year, say, freshman year even, to really think about what your budget is. So this is when you're sitting down with someone like yourself to say, what can I really afford in context of everything else on my financial journey here, right? Retirement being the big one. But if you have other children, other goals, because you could be spending on one child's college education these days. If you have a freshman in high school right now, it could cost you $400,000 to go to send a student to college on the high end. That for many families is going to move the needle in terms of if you're spending that versus $200,000 versus $100,000. So establishing that, continuing to save towards that is something that you should be going at right away. Now, the other thing from a financial aid standpoint is sometimes there are strategies you can do to maximize how much financial aid you're eligible for. They're going to be looking at your income starting 2 years before the student's ready to go to school. So if your student's going to school in fall of 2025, it's your 2023 tax year that they're looking at. So if you're going to be taking a capital gain, if you're going to be selling something, then you're going to be wanting to take care of that well in advance so it doesn't show up as an income that could reduce your eligibility for financial aid. If you have assets, certain assets count more than others. So those assets need to be changed to the appropriate place if that's an opportunity for you before the fall of the senior year when you apply. The actual financial aid application is filled out sometime usually in October or November of the senior year. When the student's accepted, the school will come back and either give a merit scholarship or a need-based package so you have all the information about the schools, what they're actually going to cost. And the majority of people don't pay the full price for college. They may get it in different ways and different amounts based on the school. So you want to establish early on also as you're building that list, not only what's my budget, but what's the likelihood that I'm going to get aid from that school? Because most people aren't paying the sticker price. So project your budget, project how well that target list may do for you, and then go and pursue the money during the senior year. And even as you get those awards, we'll talk about appealing financial aid awards, but you can sometimes ask for a little bit more and have some success. So you really want to map out the plan and then pursue it with all the vigor you can to make it less expensive.
And I know we'll talk about that in just a moment, some of the techniques you recommend there. Obviously, your work on the financial aid, you're helping families put their best foot forward. That's a great point with respect to the capital gains. And again, where they're really focusing their attention on prior year tax returns. When you think about people that maybe haven't prepared or aren't as organized as they could be, any sense of what some of the biggest mistakes families will make as they're going through that aid process that's really going to limit the benefit they ultimately receive?
I think the biggest thing that families should be thinking about is when they build the list of schools, that they're ones that may be likely to meet their budget. You don't want to go with blinders on this. The students are pushing, they may not have all the perspective of what the budget's going to be, and they just go down this path. And the parents want to do what they can for their child. So truly understanding what are the financial aid practices at the schools that your student is pursuing. And so that you will ultimately, at the end of the day, have a list of schools that will be within your realm. I think the other mistake that people make is they assume that, well, they're going to see that I have a 529 plan. They're going to take all that money, or they're going to see my savings and I'm not going to get anything. That's actually not true. So it's only a small percentage of your savings gets affected by your financial aid eligibility. A lot of these colleges in the financial aid process don't even realize if it's in a 529 college savings account or in a cash account or a stock account. So what we encourage people to do is keep saving, right? Now, if you're self-employed, if you do have some assets, there may be some changes that you can make to make yourself more eligible for aid on the need-based side. But building that list of school, keep on saving. It's not going to have a huge impact. Don't throw your hands up are some of my key pieces of advice there.
That's great. And we also think about how you're able to minimize the out of pocket expenses a family pays. Aid is one of those. Another often overlooked can be scholarships. And any suggestions, any strategies that in your experience you see families tend to have more success with as kids are trying to go out and secure some scholarship dollars?
Yes, the biggest bucket of money for merit scholarships. So you're not qualifying for need-based aid or you've exhausted that opportunity is college is giving out a tremendous amount of merit scholarships. We're talking 10, 20, $30,000 per year, no matter if you're a millionaire or if you hit the lottery, it's going to be there as long as you maintain a certain grade point average. So identifying schools where you may be a candidate for those merit scholarships can really make a huge difference. And we're seeing a lot of schools outside of the top 25 or 50 schools. The vast majority of colleges are really using this as aggressive marketing tool. They're discounting the tuition to attract a desirable student body. So find those schools that are going to give you that $20,000 a year kind of scholarship. Now, beyond that,
Sure.
when we talk about the third-party scholarships, our mentality is think locally. You're going to be competing against a smaller applicant pool. So start with your high school, start with your employer, start with your community organizations that you're involved in, as opposed to going to the big search engines where you're 1 in 1,000 applicants. Pursue those things where you're close to or you have an interest in, both parents and students.
Absolutely. And then the third sort of avenue when we think of reducing that out of pocket expense for parents, I know you talk a lot about the fact that tuition at the end of the day is truly never set in stone, or at least in a lot of colleges. And something you work with most clients on is helping them potentially negotiate a lower bill to begin with. Won't ask you to give away all of the secret sauce necessarily, but wonder if you could just chat at a high level what that looks like, and again, what are some of the potential benefits that families could expect if executed properly.
So at the end of the day, colleges are businesses. They need to fill the seats with the desirable students that they want. If they have a class that's not quite as robust as they were hoping for, that's money that's out the door. If they're in that situation, they may be more willing to consider a request for additional money. So don't feel like their best offer is their first offer is their best offer. When are they most likely to consider appeal, or we call it an appeal as opposed to negotiation because it's a little bit softer there. The biggest thing is
Sure.
if there's extenuating circumstances, change in income, change in assets, change in expenses, elder care, child care. These are all things that don't necessarily come through in the financial aid forms, but a school can consider under their special circumstances policies. So that is something going on in your life, you've just lost your job, you had a really big bonus in a year they're looking at, and that bonus isn't going to be there that following year. Let them know about it. So you can appeal that way. What we're seeing more success with in the last few years is even merit appeals. So, my grades are better than they used to be when I applied. Can I be considered for more money? Especially if they're not hitting
Sure.
that mark of their enrollment, they may give more. So you can appeal on need or merit. Need would be to the financial aid office, merit would be to the admissions office. A letter, a form, sometimes the schools will have a form to fill out, but to pursue and ask before you declare that you're going to that school.
That's great advice, and obviously very involved process. When you think about folks just starting out, any resources or tools you would suggest folks explore?
On the financial side, I come back to what I was saying about the projected awards, trying to get an understanding of how generous a school might be for your student based on your financial situation or their academic situation. And one way to do this is colleges all have something on their websites called net price calculators. And these are intended in quotation marks, to give you a projection based on your situation, how much aid you may expect. Now, some of these, particularly at the highly selected schools, are pretty reliable in terms of giving a projection, especially on the need side. Some of them are just okay, but it's a starting point to see how you might do in that college's mind in terms of their generosity. Because colleges will look at a person's finances and their willingness with merit scholarships very differently. Some might look at, if you're divorced, custodial parent and a non-custodial parent. Some might look at a home equity. Some might not. Some might still consider if you have multiple children in college. Some may not. So to just get a generic number of what what's called student aid index isn't enough. You want to get a projection. So the net price calculators can be a great tool. This is also something that we do for no cost. So we maintain a lot of data about these colleges. So every year we're tracking, we're getting the actual awards based on GPA and families' financial situations. Oh, how did that person do last year? And what do we think you're going to get? So that way you can build an informed list.
Oh, that's great. And Gregg, if people are listening, they do see a lot of value in the process. They would want a partner such as yourself. What is the best way for people to reach out and engage with you?
Thanks. So we always start with a no obligation consultation, and our website is campusbound.com. Our phone number is on there, as well as you can fill out an inquiry form or email us at info@campusbound.com, CAMPUSBOUND. And just say, hey, I heard you on a webinar, or a recording. I'd love to learn more, see how you can help me and my family. Because one of the things we really appreciate at Campus Bound is that everybody's coming from a different situation. Students are across the academic spectrum. Students have different goals, different majors they're interested in, different financial situations that may or may not qualify for financial aid, or different savings that they are prepared to dedicate towards college. So we want to identify how we can be of most help to you. And so that initial conversation is going to help us to get to know you and figure out what level of services may be most fitting. We have a range of different options, the way you can work with us, mixing and matching between our admissions and financial help.
No, that's great. And I have one more bonus question for you before we go. Something I know in my world conversation have all the time with clients is, what is that reasonable amount? What is that figure that they're able to contribute, both financially or from a discretionary standpoint? And be curious, in your experience, have any suggestions for parents, either initially approaching that conversation or how that evolves over time, being able to help their children realistically understand what is the number they're able to contribute?
That's a great question. One of my big mantras is to communicate with a student, to have that conversation early in the process about what the expectations are. And this is why I strongly encourage people to, first of all, for their own self, based on their own means, to figure out how much they can truly dedicate without affecting their other goals in life. And, retirement being the biggest one. We don't want to see you work until you're 75, right? We want you to have the resources so that you can retire when you want, just like I know Eric, you're focused on that too. So working with you so you can establish that, and then start to have the conversation with the student that this isn't carte blanche, that this is something we have to wait to see what the awards come in to look like. This is what we're going to expect from you. Student loans are a doable thing. Now, you don't want your student to have too many loans and be burdened by this for too long. I was speaking with a woman last night, and she was telling her own story, how she had $200,000 in educational loans, and it saddled her for a long time. And that's obviously way too much, but they can handle something. And even people that have means are sometimes saying, let the student have some responsibility. There's a lesson here. There's skin in the game. And there's something to that. And there's some great loan programs that the government might have that can give them some responsibility, but not overwhelm. And the terms aren't as bad. So establishing that, but talking about it early on, and then leaking it into the conversation throughout, and thinking about this as a regular kind of purchase that you're making. You're always weighing the pros and cons of every purchase you make. Is it worth getting the fancy car or living in the fancy house? Or no, we just need to get to work, so I'm going to get the the middle range cards and save myself $20,000? Do we want to go out to the fancy dinner or not? Like small and big purchases, you're always weighing the cost versus value benefit. And I think teaching your student and using this as a launching point to give them some of that lesson is really vital. Students are sworn by information as they're going through their peer groups. This school's better than that one. That one's got a better TikTok page than that one, right? So yes, but is it really worth the extra $10,000 per year to go to school A versus school B? Is my outcome going to be different? Have those conversations, because I think that's with the peer pressure influences that are out there, it can go down a bad path. So early and often, and I'll tell you one story from years and years ago, which got me on this big train of making sure that I have my loudspeaker out on this point, is divorced couple didn't want to have this conversation with their daughter. And she got to the end of the day and they called me and they said, "What should we do? My daughter just got into this really expensive school and we don't have the means to do it. She got a financial aid package, but it wasn't that great. What should we do?" And the parents weren't, the divorced parents were on different pages on what they were able to do and willing to do. And then you had the student that had blinders onto it. And she had just got into her dream school. And so one of two options was going to happen at that point for this family. The girl was going to cry a lot because she was going to have to withdraw from her dream option, or the parents were going to take on more debt than they could handle.
Sure.
So if they had had that conversation a year earlier and said, "We have to play out all the cards here," it wouldn't have gotten to that point. What ended up happening was the parents took on a lot of debt. And I'm sure at this point they're done paying it, but it was going to be 10 years, 15 years before they were done paying that with a lot of interest. So having that conversation would have prevented that problem in the long run. But people want to bury their head in the sand. They don't want to break their kid's heart. They want to be optimistic and so forth. But by having that conversation and not throwing in your student in the last minute can prevent a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And I'd even add to that, from my perspective, it's before you even have that conversation, have it with your spouse. I've had self-made families with wealth that want to be able to pay the full tuition because they didn't have that as kids. I've also had legacy families with wealth that want their kids to have some skin in the game. I think first and foremost, having you and your spouse on the same page. Then, to your point, having that conversation with clients or with children, everybody can understand what's realistic, what's attainable, and then based upon the numbers, make the best decision.
And this is where, both I'm sure for your perspective and from mine, that we can really, having someone as a third party, neutral party, to not only have the expertise in something, but to be able to help navigate those difficult conversations between spouses, or ex-spouses, and student and parent. It can really help to make it so that you're not the bad guy, right? And we're college counselors, financial aid counselors, right? We're, your investment advisors, because you're giving that emotional understanding and helping them to make a thoughtful decision on their own. And that's where I think having a third party that is there. We're having facilitating a lot of these difficult conversations.
Well, Greg will say this has been absolutely inspirational and insightful. I appreciate you again for taking the time, sharing your perspective with us. Again, for everyone tuning in, hope you found this valuable as well. Would please encourage you to reach out, speak with Greg and his team. I know they would certainly welcome the opportunity to work with you. As well, if you enjoyed this conversation, would please encourage you, hit the subscribe button to tune in for future episodes. Until next time, thank you again.